This week is Parshat Yitro, Parshas Yisro, which contains the highlight of the Parsha, is the giving of the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. So the momentous occasion, once in history occurrence of mass revelation, which takes place at Sinai, where we hear God, the Torah describes how God descends down onto the mountain, and we hear God tell us his plan for all of existence, for all of creation, for all of eternity. Now, you can imagine what it must have felt like, or maybe we can't actually imagine what it must have felt like to be there. Well, of course, we know that every soul will ever be born was there, bore witness to that experience, to that event. But what could that have felt like to be standing face to face with God, talking to God, hearing from God? It must have been an incredibly amazing, transcendent experience. And of course, then God gives you his blueprint, his plan. He communicates to you his plan for humanity and for creation, for all of existence. And so imagine God ascends after the experience, the fire stops on the mountain, and everybody goes back to their everyday civilian life. But is that really possible? Having just heard from God, having just communicated with God, having just had this experience where God tells you what it is that he wants and invites you into a relationship with him, could life ever really be the same? And the truth is that humanity has really, in a sense, been struggling with this really ever since we've tried to have a relationship with God. The idea of having a relationship with God, connecting with God, is one that involves ascending the mountain, as it were, rising up above your everyday mundane life and experience to connect with the divine. But of course, God is infinite, God is holy. And so to enter into that relationship, it involves, certainly to an extent, some sacrifice, as well as this ability to rise above your everyday, to transcend your own limitations and your own frailties. The problem, of course, is that in doing so, in embarking on this major project of connection with God, connection with the divine, it's not uncommon for people to burn plenty of bridges along the way, because after all, you're involved in something noble, something otherworldly, something godly, something ultimate, involvement with ultimate truth, and the noise around you sometimes can feel like it's a threat and feel like it's bringing you down. You need to separate from it. So here we find something very interesting, that right after the Ten Commandments, we have a few commandments that are described in the Torah immediately in the aftermath of the giving of the Ten Commandments, where we're instructed to build an altar for God out of the earth. And the Torah actually also says that if you are to build the altar out of stone, it can't be hewn stone. You can't use metal to chisel and to form the rocks for the altar. Why? Because if you're going to raise your sword on that, you're going to desecrate these stones, the altar. The reason for that is because, as the Torah tells us, metal is used primarily to shorten man's life. Metal is used as a weapon. It's used to end life. And since metal is used as a weapon to harm others and to end life, it can't be used in the building of the altar, which is designed and intended to prolong life and to protect the sanctity of life. And so we're told that we have to build an altar, and the altar, of course, is the ultimate space where we connect with the divine. But what's brought on the altar is sacrifices. The word for sacrifice in Hebrew is karban, which means l'karev, to come close to God. So the altar is where we stand up on that altar, connecting with the divine, rising above our everyday. The altar is an elevated platform. We're above the ground. We're reaching higher. We're ascending to heaven. And when we stand on that altar, we have to remember that the altar, while maybe shiny on the outside with copper, the inside has to be earth. We have to remain humble. We have to remain connected to our source and recognize that we're, like we say at the end of the Amidah, "V'nafshi ka'afal hakol, my soul is like dust before everyone," remaining humble before everybody. And so even though we might be reaching greater heights and self-actualization, or whatever it is that we're pursuing in our connection with the divine, we have to still remain humble, even before those who seem to not be on the altar, even those who seem to be lower than us, right? We're standing on an elevated platform. Even those lower than us, we always have to remain humble before them as well. And another instruction is that when we ascend that altar, we need to ascend it on a ramp. You can't ascend the altar with steps. So the altar is an elevated platform, and in order to get up there, you need a way to get up. And so the Torah tells us the commandment is you may not ascend the altar with steps. It has to be on a ramp. Why? Because if you're climbing the steps, so imagine the priests in the temple wearing their long tunics and short knickers under their tunics, and when you take steps, you have to separate your legs, and the stones under that are beneath your feet have a maybe a partial view, but can see up under your tunic. And so, spreading your legs as you climb the altar is not very modest, and it's embarrassing for the stones. It shows a little disrespect for the stones that you're climbing up. That there's a potential for possibly exposing yourself to those stones. Inappropriate. Whereas if you're climbing a ramp, so on a ramp, it doesn't require to separate your legs as much. And so therefore, that the stones can retain their dignity without having to get an unnecessary view from their perspective as the person climbs up, walks up onto the altar. And so the sages tell us, and Rashi brings this on the verse, that we need to recognize that if the Torah is sensitive even to an inanimate stone, one that doesn't have feelings, a stone doesn't get embarrassed, and even so the Torah is concerned with the shame of the stone, how much more so when we talk about our fellow man. And so we have to realize that when we climb that altar, we can't climb it at the expense of others. There's a story told about the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe of Chabad, Rebbe Shalom Dov Ber of Lubavitch, who there are a number of stories from his childhood that have been transmitted to us. He had an older brother, his name was Zalman Aaron, and they were once playing as little children. They were playing in the yard, and their father, the Rebbe Marash, Rebbe Shmuel, was sitting nearby and studying, and he observed his children playing. Now, Rebbe Zalman Aaron, known as the Raza, that was an acronym for his name, was older, but he was shorter than his younger brother. And he felt that was inappropriate, that the older brother should be shorter than the younger one. So he took his younger brother and he placed him in a ditch. And he said, "You stand here." He puts him in a ditch. And like this, the older brother was taller. Later, their father, who had observed this, said to them that if you want to be higher than somebody else, get up on a chair. You don't put somebody else down. That's not the way to be bigger or taller, is by demeaning somebody, by putting somebody else down. If you want to be taller, you want to be greater, so you get onto a chair, you reach higher, you reach a higher place. And this is an important message for us. The lesson after we receive the Torah, become the chosen people, a nation of priests and princes, we can't let that get to our heads. And especially when we work on ourselves and work on nurturing and enhancing and deepening our relationship with God, if in the process we become less sensitive to others, if in that process we demean others, we put others down, and even thinking that it might come from some kind of righteous indignation or insight, chances are we're heading in the wrong direction. God says, you want to climb the altar, you want to get close to me, you have to remember, to be humble. The altar should be made out of earth that represents humility. And if you're going to use stone, not hurt anybody else. You can't be insensitive to anybody else. And at the same time, when we climb that altar, we climb it on a ramp, because we have to always be sensitive to the dignity of others. And when we can do this, then when we reach the top of the altar, we're not forgetful of others, we're mindful of others, considerate of others. And here we can truly have a path forward to developing a deep relationship and love for God. The Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, founder of the Chabad movement, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, once asked him, what's greater, love of God or love of the Jewish people? And he said, both of them are important, right? But we know that the verse says, God says, I love you, says God. So we know that God loves us. And therefore the love of your fellow is more important, because when you love, or is deeper, because when you love your fellow, you're loving the one, you're loving the one who your lover loves. In other words, if you love somebody and you love somebody truly and deeply, the deeper an indication that you really, really love them, or an indication of the depth of your love, is when you love the things or the people that they love as well. And so if you want to know whether you truly love God, you have to ask yourself, how much do I love those whom he loves, the people he loves? And so this is the message that the Torah delivers to us right after Mount Sinai, which is that when we receive the Ten Commandments, when God communicates to us, when God chooses us, it's important for us to recognize the enormous responsibility that comes with it, as well as this idea that rather than make somebody feel an inflated sense of self, to the contrary, we need to feel humbled. We need to be humbled by the awesome task that God entrusts us with. And as well, we need to remember that the path to God is by respecting others, by treating others with dignity, by being sensitive to others, and being humbled before anyone and everyone, regardless of where they stand on their journey towards the divine.